working on the 2030 framework policy. We are also studying and analyzing the guidelines for subsidies to state aid to energy and environment. And that also means renewables. You were mentioning this problem. If you are changing the subsidies for renewables retroactively, if that is happening in one country, that has bad implications for the whole industry. They lose faith in politicians doing that. I do not blame those who had to do it because of some tough situations. But right now, we are looking through in the Commission services, what should the subsidies regime be in Europe after 2020? Because if we have a common Europeanized energy policy, we cannot compete with who has the biggest purse to pay subsidies with. As I mentioned, I come from Denmark. In Germany, they pay 3 times as much for biogas. So Danish farmers living in the border region, they drive down, of course, south of the border to get the price, the subsidies they can get in Germany. Why should they not? But that's the kind of thing we have to reflect. How do we avoid that? And how can we create a more dynamic way of subsidizing new technologies? So that we subsidize immature technologies, but the day when they have become competitiveness, like for instance onshore wind will be after 2020, then of course they should not be eternally subsidized. So it's just to say that while we are having the exercise on defining the targets for 2030, we also go through this state aid regime. And very last point to Mrs. Ruiz also on one thing I just wanted to mention when you were mentioning forestry and adaptation. We are also now looking into insurance. That's also one area. How can we have better responsibility, not just with public authorities and national parliaments? How can we activate private capital when it comes not only to invest in mitigation, but also help us get it right on adaptation? So the insurance sector is one of the sectors who should also come into this picture. We are working on that in the Commission.
Thank you, Commissioner. We are really cut for time. So what I will do with the, if it's okay with my 2 colleagues, is go to the other questioners and then go back to the 2 panellists who haven't spoken yet. So I would appeal to the next 6 people to keep your question very brief. If it's not finished after a minute, I will just have to cut you off. The next questioner is from Belgium, Mr. Calvo Castanet.
Thank you for the strict but honest organization from the presidency. 2 questions for the commissioner, Mr. Hedegaard. We had some reflections with Mr. Oettinger this morning about the post-2020 framework and about the targets. But it's not only a question targets on renewables, GHG emissions, energy efficiency. It's also a question which ambition we have as European Union. And Mr. Oettinger said this morning, I think 40 or 50% less GHG emissions in 2030 is too ambitious. I propose a pragmatic approach. I think 30% less GHG emissions in 2030, it's more business as usual than tackle climate change. So where is the ambition of the European Commission? 10 seconds. And 2, Durban, one voice, indeed, aside, the acts with the LDC countries. What's the strategy for Warsaw? Because my impression was that in Doha it was less than before.
Thank you. The United Kingdom, Joan Wally.
I'll be very quick. My first question, our Environmental Audit Select Committee report on carbon budgets recommended that because the UK carbon budgets don't reflect emissions produced in the UK and exclude emissions embedded in goods imported from abroad, that there should be some scope for looking at how that might be worked into the carbon budgets regime, so that we're not just consuming, that what we consume should be taken into account, even if it's produced elsewhere. And the second point really is just to say that I think that all our national parliamentary committees on the environment have got a really important role to play in terms of raising awareness and actually helping to get this cross-cutting understanding, which we need both at national level and at European level as well. And even if we can't get the international agreements going as quickly as we want, the fact that individual countries are going to be coming forward, like China, is going to be making an enormous amount of difference.
Thank you, John. From Northern Ireland, Anna Lowe.
Thank you. Northern Ireland is a region of the UK. Sorry, got it. Northern Ireland is a region of the UK. While there's a UK Climate Change Act, we also have the opportunity to bring forward our own climate change bill. Our government has just published a paper for public consultation for such a bill. One of the questions asked in the consultation is whether we should set carbon reduction targets in primary legislation now and or we should leave it to secondary legislation in later years. What's the Commissioner's view on this?
Thank you. From France, Mr. Chantegouet.
Bonjour. Deux points. Premièrement, en ce qui concerne...
2 points. First of all, on the Kyoto Protocol, a decision was taken that there should be a new period from 2013 to 2020. My question is as follows. In the second period, well, there's supposed to be ratification by the European Union and also by the member states of the European Union. Second point, on the quotas and the quotas market, well, it's gone right off the rails at the moment. It only relates to intensive electricity, and I wonder whether carbon tax shouldn't be introduced at state level, member state level, in order to be able to maintain this diffuse sector. Thank you.
Issue, we are looking for a global answer. So we have to look the last report of the International Energy Agency, which is showing us that until 2030, the demand of electricity will be doubled for 18,000 terawatts to 34,000 terawatts. So unfortunately, fossil fuels will increase, not decrease, from 79 to 81, and the most important resource will be coal. China is importing 330 millions of tons. So there is any mechanism on European level which you have in mind as a mechanism of clean development to maintain our role as a leader on climate change in exporter, protecting by this way the jobs, protecting our main industry.
Thank you, Mr. Jansu. And finally, Baroness Palantir from the UK.
Thank you. I mean, the UK government are very keen that the EU ETS is saved by adopting the backloading proposals. But in the long term, our House of Lords Committee support the combination of tightening the cap and introducing a floor price. In discussions we've had in the past with the Commission, you've been fairly uneasy about the complexity of the member state politics and the risks of managing the market, including sort of a concern that discussing a floor price would also provoke discussions of a ceiling price. So can I ask the Commissioner, does the Commission support tightening the cap and introducing a floor price as a means to increase investor confidence and stabilise the financing for future possible infrastructure?
Thank you, Baroness. Now back to our panel, Dr. Motherway and then Mr. McCarthy.
I'll be very brief because, again, the poor Commissioner had a lot of the questions there. But I just really want to say a word about the financing element that came up a couple of times and related back to the energy efficiency side, not to focus exclusively on that. But mobilising finance to decarbonise our economies is central, be it in infrastructure, which needs massive investment, renewables, and of course energy efficiency. And all of that will require two things. First of all is prioritisation, and second is leveraging of private capital well beyond the capabilities of member states and exchequers themselves. On the prioritisation, it just remains a focus, and it's one of the reasons why my organisation remains well funded in terms of the grants it gives out, is that energy efficiency still remains the cheapest source source of carbon, is the point I made. And if a member state is thinking about, in the context of 2020, I have to spend a certain amount of euros or whatever on carbon abatement, what am I going to spend those on? Efficiency remains the cheapest in terms of the volume of carbon it can produce, but also has the additional benefits in terms of jobs and things in the short term. So it remains a priority in that sense. But acknowledging that the Exchequer can't come anywhere near the levels of volumes of funding required in this issue, the question then becomes, where does that money come from? And again, there's a disconnect here, what you could call a market failure. And again, just to use the example I spoke about, if energy efficiency in buildings takes 10 years to pay itself back because it requires capital up front but then pays over time. The equation there is that a certain investment in buildings will return very predictably and very stably 10, 12, 15% over the next 15 years. For some sources of capital, that's an extremely attractive prospect and the kind of investment that many sources of money are actually looking for. The question then becomes the failure between the supply of that money and the demand for it, and often it's because projects are too small or the technologies are new or whatever else. And I think that's where a major focus for member states should be not on trying to intervene in terms of substituting the finance, but actually correcting the structural issues that stop the kind of finance that is available and looking for returns that energy and climate projects offer, that stop that money getting to where it should be going.
John.
Thank you, Chair. Just very quickly, Anna Lowe mentioned the issue of targets and primary legislation versus secondary legislation, or how to deal with it in legislation. Just to say, we are, as I mentioned in my remarks, we are in the process of a consultation on the outline provisions of climate legislation here in the Republic as well, and the Chairman's Committee will be producing a report on that. So you may be interested in looking at how we have dealt with the targets issue in that legislation, which is in effect one which fastens and enshrines our subscription to targets at the EU and the international level, not just now, but those that come at us in the future as well, so that it would be a dynamic piece of legislation that would, if you like, take on board targets according as they change over time. An issue raised in relation to carbon tax and carbon tax at member state level. I suppose, as the Commissioner has emphasised, the importance of the ETS has been the way in which it is an instrument and a system that has operated at a pan-European level. And our own Minister, in the context of dealing with questions around the backloading proposal and how that has found itself getting kicked back into the Environment Committee of the Parliament, our Minister has kind of very clearly said, well, if people have a problem with the ETS, what is their alternative? And certainly in the debate that we've been listening to, we haven't really heard any coherent ETS, and I think there would be certainly a road that we would travel in which we might have 27 or shortly 28 different individual mechanisms as some sort of a patchwork quilt replacement for an ETS is territory I think that we would all need to think very, very carefully before we even go down that route. That doesn't preclude, though, the introduction of individual mechanisms in individual member states, as long as they don't sort of create confusion and overlap with a system such as the ETS. For example, we have a carbon tax here in Ireland for a number of years. It's in the process of being extended, and it applies to certain sectors, but not to the ETS, which works within the rules of the ETS system. Just picking up on the point that Brian addressed in relation to investment and in relation to return on investment, and again going back to a point that the Commissioner made at the outset, where she talked in terms of there being 3 crises at the moment, and sometimes we get a lot of discussion around the fact that we have an economics crisis and a jobs crisis, and sort of, would you ever take your environment crisis and your climate crisis over there, and we'll come back and deal with it at some time in the future. And I think the key message that we've been trying to deliver here in Ireland with the new Sustainable Development Framework published last year, and in new initiatives such as green public procurement and a new Green Economy Jobs Action Plan, is that there are a myriad of ways in which you can. We are very firmly of the view that you should be dealing with these things together, as the Commissioner says, as integrated crises that have to be dealt with together. But there are a myriad of ways in which you can deal with it which deliver both environmental and economic benefits. There's one example that I cite quite regularly, and I'll just do it very briefly, Chairman, because I know we're under time pressure. Long before Member States were required to have a national waste prevention programme under the Waste Framework Directive, we had one in Ireland back since 2004. In time, it developed into a broader resource efficiency programme. And one particular initiative, it's managed by the Environmental Protection Agency, which you heard from the Director General, Laura Burke, this morning, is a cleaner, greener production programme. It's targeted at small and medium-sized enterprises. It's targeted at how they can deliver better performance on how they use water, how they use energy, and how they deal with waste. So 24 small companies together invested €4.5 million in energy saving, water conservation, and a resource management approach to waste. That's €4.5 million in total. The annual payback for those 24 companies was €3 million. So within a year and a half, the initial investment was paid back. There's ongoing savings of €3 million per annum, and €3 million per annum by my maths equates to about 150 jobs at the current minimum wage. Those are real-life, practical examples of what we can achieve from an environmental and an economic competitiveness perspective at the same time, and I think there's plenty more opportunities like that we can and should be taking.
Thank you, John. I'm going to give the final slot to Commissioner Hedegaard to wrap up.
Thank you very much. I can just echo the last point. Also, if we start to count in the co-benefits, we're not always very good at that. It's as if somebody is taking care of air pollution and somebody is taking care of health and that children get asthma, and somebody is taking care of environment. But we should be a bit better to assess when we invest in something, for instance, climate-friendly solutions, energy-efficient solutions, clean technologies, then there are actually a lot of things to be gained in other sectors. I think that's one of the things we need to understand as politicians, that we are living in an extremely complex world where we have to break down the silos of thinking like this and start to thinking a bit more across the board when we find the best possible solutions. It's extremely challenging, but I think that's where our citizens need us as politicians to be able to think across the board. I understand the businessman, the CEO, who is being measured every quarter, how he is doing during the crisis and how much profit he can make in his company. If he is dominated by short-term thinking and think, oh, just give me the cheapest expenses I can have, our job as politicians must be to break away from that and also dare to think what is cheap also in the medium and longer term. There are many remarks. I cannot have time to go into all of them. I appreciate very much Joan Wally, who were mentioning the awareness raising. I think that's incredibly important. We have a tendency of forgetting about it. Our media, they get tired of writing about climate change. It's old news. Yes, but it's still happening out there. Last Friday, we passed the 400 parts per million mark that everybody, all the scientists have said, be careful. When you start to exceed that, then you're in for some real troubles. And I think that is where national parliamentarians, they still have the ears of their people to make the awareness. We are making a campaign right now from the European Commission, but I've seen it's not that easy from Brussels to make a campaign that fits all 27 member states. There you can do it much more targeted, your people. But what we are trying to do through that campaign, that is to say, if we are serious about climate change, it does not have to be, you must not do that, you cannot do that, it's all sort of what you cannot do. No, it's about highlighting all the smart technologies we have out there, all the good solutions. I just went to a fire station, and I will end with that comment. I went to a fire station this morning here in Dublin, and to listen to those people who started off with just changing the lamps into LED lamps and closing the lamps by daylight, by the way. And the first year they saved €26,000 at one fire station. And then they thought, oh, maybe we could also do that, and maybe we could do this with our water, and maybe, and maybe, and maybe. And today they have done more than 300 different things And it's all self-revolving financially because they can finance it through what they save. And the final point on that, they have created local jobs through this. That's just in all its simplicity. It's not simple to do it, but that is what we can do in Europe if we do it smartly. And if we don't do it, I assure you, the Chinese, the Koreans, the Brazilians, they are taking the markets for the future. So when we have to exit the crisis, and there I end where I started, not just having growth, but having growth with jobs. And that's not necessarily the same. I think that the whole green economy offers a possibility of also getting growth with jobs and not just with robots or no jobs or jobs in China.
Thank you very much, Commissioner, and thank you to our panel. Colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I welcome the presentations here today by both the Commissioners, by our Minister for Energy, Communications and Natural Resources. I further welcome the presentations of Ms Schomacker, Ms Burke and indeed Dr Murray. In this morning's session, we heard from Commissioner Oettinger and Minister Abbott about the necessity for concerted EU action to tackle the energy challenges that we all now face. I commend the hard work that is currently being done by all of the three units of the European Union, namely the Council, the Parliament and the Commission, to conclude negotiations on the 7th Environmental Action Programme. That's an absolutely strategic part and a priority for the Irish Presidency, and I look forward with confidence to achieving agreement on that before we conclude our presidency. Ms Laura Buck from the EPA gave an excellent overview about air quality in Europe and the need to improve standards right throughout the Union. We are all dependent on the air that we breathe, and it is incumbent upon us to ensure that the air that we breathe is as clean as it should be and as it needs to be. The effects of ever-increasing carbon emissions on our changing climate are the subject of huge debate right across the globe. Science suggests that man-made climate change is an indisputable fact and something we need to address now before irreparable damage is done. There's broad consensus from the floor today on the need to rapidly improve technology that will create clean energy. Coordinated action and investment is the only way this can be achieved, and I concur with much of what Commissioner Hedegaard has said in that particular respect. Can I say finally, it has been a pleasure and a privilege for me to host all of you here today and indeed last night. I hope that you enjoyed the scenery and the cuisine of the Botanic Gardens. I sincerely hope you enjoyed the element of Irish dancing from our group, Buru Buru, who are a branch of Kyoto's Kyotori Éireann. I know that some people were very impressed by the rendition by a fellow Corkman called Sean O'Shea of what we call the Puck of Willa. That's all a unique part of what makes us Irish, and I think it highlights, no matter what the economic difficulty is, no matter what the challenge, we hope that you saw something else in Ireland between last night and today that will make you want to come back. In relation to the challenges that lie ahead, I know that Europe will deliver because quite simply we have to. Thank you all very much.
Chairman, if I could just come in briefly. In July, we hand over the EU presidency to our Lithuanian colleagues who are here in numbers this morning and today. And before we conclude, I'd like to hand over to introduce to you to Mr. Žemaitaitis, Chairperson of the Committee on Economics of the Lithuanian Parliament, who would like to say a brief few words.
Dear Chairman, dear colleagues, it is a great honor for me to congratulate Ireland on the 7th successful presidency of the Council of the European Union. Please accept our sincere gratitude to the Irish colleagues for a well-organized and relevant meeting, warm welcome and traditional history of Irish, especially last evening. It was very nice, special dances for my health. I thank you very much. In the second half of 2013, Lithuania will hold the presidency of the Council of the European Union for the first time in its history. We will do our best to ensure that our presidency is equally successful. On behalf of Mr. Algimantas Lamakinas, Chair of the Seimas Committee on Environment Protection, Mr. Valentinas Bukauskas, Chair of the Seimas Committee on States Administration and Local Authorities, and on my own behalf of the Chair of Committee of Economics, I would like to sincerely invite you all to an event organized by the Seimas in the framework of the parliamentary dimension of the presidency. This will be a meeting on the chairperson of committees of the Committee of Environment Protection and the Committee of States, Administration and Local Authorities on 25-24 of November 2015, entitled Macro-Regional Strategies, Development and Prospects. We look forward to welcome you in Vilnius. Welcome. Yeah. Thank you.
Colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your contributions today. I'd like to agree with my fellow chairperson that we've had an excellent discussion today. In fact, it was so good that we couldn't get some of you into the discussion and had to cut others a little short. So apologies on that, but we would like and look forward to this debate continuing under the Lithuanian presidency. We would like to wish you an enjoyable stay for the rest of your time in Dublin and a safe journey home. And in Gaeilge we'll say Slán Wallow. Thank you very much. The meeting is now adjourned. Thanks, Brian.
of aspects of their work, and at a time of crisis like this, Irish people, I think, much more perhaps than in the past, do care very much for the welfare of their animals, and they're not just measuring the economic cost of this, they are conscious of the animal welfare dimension as well. So whatever can be done, I suppose, to assist farmers to come forward and to make known that pressure. I don't think we should ignore the idea of the human cost that's there in this area, and I certainly think the extension of the scheme will hopefully allow farmers to consider the situation that they are in, and that the department will work to ensure that farmers are aware of all the support that's available. I don't know, Minister, whether the third, I suppose, element is animal welfare itself. Obviously, cattle fall or die for many different reasons, and it can be hard to put a figure on it, and one doesn't want to be sensationalist about it either, but if you can assist us with some kind of an estimate about what the toll of this has been in terms of fallen animals attributable to the fodder crisis, that would be helpful, I think. Is there a particular section within the department that's dealing with this, Minister? And I'm sorry I missed your opening speech. I was away on other business, so you may have addressed that. But how is the department going to be structured on an ongoing basis in terms of attention to this? Because it seems to me, and just following on from what Senator O'Keefe said there, that if current trends and weather continue, and if this kind of sporadic weather crisis continues to arise, then we'll certainly need an ongoing response to this. The tents can't just be packed up and put away, because it looks like that we will be dealing with these problems into the future.
Senator Flaherty. While buchas gáil leis an seandar mullen as the chadam rintlam agus buchas leis an arif which after seach been leis gilt agari ellen nach tu should seach tatu hen gekroog and in the biggest is integral like jagan to seach just shanat. I won't go over some of the ground that has been covered already, but certainly speaking to farmers in my own area, I can see that they're very distressed to see their animals weak and unwell, and the thoughts of animals dying has certainly dwelled on their minds. And we note that some parts of the country collections of dead animals increased by up to 40%. And the Department of Agriculture has confirmed that deaths of cattle aged 48 months and over was up by over 60% between January and February of this year and January and February of 2012. More than that, there's also the huge concern then about how families themselves are going to keep going without maybe a milk check coming in, and finding it difficulty to get credit from co-ops, that their credit lines are running out. I noted what you were saying about the banks was that 50% of farms are debt-free. But the corollary, the corollary then is that the other 50% do, and possibly the banks are extending credit to the 50% who don't have a problem with their lending criteria, but the other 50% could possibly, if they're already stretched debt-wise, could be ineligible for extra support from banks. So that might be part of the reason why we're hearing the stories of farmers having difficulty getting credit from the banks, and certainly I think that is something that needs to be looked at. And I was talking to farmers in Galway this morning, and a senior representative from the IFA in Galway has asked me to relate to you that the fodder situation over the last 36 hours has severely got worse over the last 36 hours, and that people don't have the money to buy the feed. So even though I appreciate the scheme that has been brought in to bring the fodder into the country is a welcome response, but the actual having the cash at hand then to be able to buy the fodder when it gets here is another issue.
They're not being asked for cash, Deputy.
They've been asked to pay for fodder, etc. And I'm relaying to you what they're telling me is that they are finding that it is very, very difficult to cope without the checks coming in. And I do recognise the response that you have given, and I think it's very, very welcome. And certainly the forward planning is crucial. So, you know, that inflexibility in the institutions certainly doesn't help, and it has to be tackled, because I think it's more than just anecdotal that there are difficulties there, and I certainly will follow up on your offer there that if we have specific cases, we will bring them to your attention on that. The other call that they did make to me is the possibility of, and it's been mentioned already, of paying in advance on the DAS.
You have less than a minute.
To pay that to them so that they can manage their own cash flow in a better way, because they believe that there's definitely worth consideration. And I also welcome the fact that you've indicated that you will look at extending the transport subsidy scheme for as long as that is necessary in the prevailing weather conditions, obviously. But obviously, what needs to be done is obviously a review of the situation, why we got to the situation that we're in with this, and the advanced planning put in place for the rest of the year to deal with the position that we might be in if we have a lack of fodder later on in the year. So to Madam Buich, it's Tigam Gwilcha, Ita Crua, it's Ita Tacker. I appreciate the stress that it must have actually put on yourselves and people in your department, but certainly we need to learn from this crisis and make sure that we can handle it in the weeks and months to come.
And Tara?
Yeah, no, look, first of all, thanks for the tone of the questions and the discussion. I think it was quite constructive, and let me try and answer some of the questions to clarify some of the points. First of all, in relation to advanced payments and single farm payment, first of all, let's just be clear. There's never a single farm payment in September. Single farm payment isn't due until the middle of December. Last year, and for about 3 of the last 5 years, we have managed to get an advance on that in terms of getting half of the payment 6 weeks early. So that's in the middle of October. And we will be applying for that again this year because of the cash flow issues on farms. But one can't get approval for earlier payments than that for single farm payment, and we shouldn't raise the expectation around that. And even if we could, we would actually, as a department, have to carry the cost of that in terms of financing it, because the payments don't actually become available until the end of the year. So actually, even for an advance payment 6 weeks early, we have to actually bridge the cost of that as a department, which has a cost in terms of the cost of that finance. So I mean, my department isn't a bank. You know, we can't produce significant sums of money. I mean, what had been suggested to me over the last number of weeks, and I'd love to facilitate this if I could, but I don't think I can, is that every farmer would get an advance payment of €1,000 on a single farm payment. Now, we have 130,000 farmers in the country that have single farm payment. So do the sums. And you can see the kind of monies that we would have to pay now and actually get from the Department of Public Expenditure now, because there's no money coming from Europe until the very end of the year. So that is why we have a banking system, to be able to help farmers get over that problem. And for example, in the discussions I've had with very senior bank officials, the kind of facilities that they want to put in place are short-term loans that have no repayment requirement at all until single farm payment comes in for farmers, at relatively low interest rates and so on. I mean, that is why you have a banking system, to try and get people through difficult periods in terms of credit availability and financing and bridging and so on. I mean, my department can't be expected to do that. So cash flow can be resolved by credit facilities in co-ops that are available for people, within reason obviously, by banking facilities that should be there for farmers that have the capacity to repay, and most of them do. Let's not forget we have very strong commodity prices this year. Milk prices this year may reach an all-time high. We have strong and increasing beef prices also in terms of kill. Store cattle are an issue at the moment because of the availability of grass, as indeed are store lambs. But I mean, if we get some kind of normalisation of weather patterns, that should resolve itself quite quickly. So I mean, this has been a disastrous start to the year in farming, but it doesn't have to be a disastrous year in terms of returns to farmers, because the price of commodities will remain strong right up until the end of the year, in my view. But we need to plan medium and long term now to actually manage how we get through what has been primarily a fodder crisis, but there are other issues linked to it as well. I accept that, Senator. And we are doing that in an intensive way, and we have people in the department that are on this full time, just like we had people in the department on the horse meat crisis full time when we had to deal with that problem. So the idea that we would set up more task forces or groups, in my view, in some way misses the point. I mean, we have, I'm not saying we shouldn't have a group linked to the high-level implementation group of Food Harvest 2020, and we do have lots of groups that are linked to that. And in fact, at the next high-level implementation group, we will have a report on an environmental impact assessment of Food Harvest in terms of its impact on the environment, on biodiversity, on changing weather patterns, and all of that. We've had a consultant working on that for the last 6 months, and they're reporting this month to the high-level working group. So those issues, those broader issues around the environment are being looked at in some detail, and we're required to do that. with a plan of this scale. So the issues around advance payments are, we would normally pay DAS payments around the week of the ploughing match, generally, towards the end of September. That's when we'll be paying them again this year. No, because as I say, what you're looking for, there's about just under 200 million euros of DAS payments due. And if we start paying farmers an advance sum, how much do we give them? Who gets the advance payment? Who doesn't? You know, that's only a few months away. It's in September. We should have a banking system and a credit facility available for farmers that can actually bridge them until they get their DAS payments. I don't see why that can't work, rather than asking the department essentially to be a banking facility, because we have to pay for that. Farmers are paying for it because it's coming out of the same budget. Right? It's not like I have a lump sum of money there now that I can give out whenever I want. You know, DAS payments, a significant element of DAS payments are matching funds coming from the EU. So I look at it, but I don't want to raise expectations in relation to it, okay? For the same reason as a single farm payment, although I accept that DAS payment is a matching fund, so it is slightly different. But once again, I would say that all of the conversations I've had, and I've had a lot of conversations with banks over the last 2 weeks, suggests that actually there should be short-term and medium-term credit facilities in place for most farmers. And if there are, now this isn't about refinancing loans for machinery or for buying land or for renting Conacre. This is about dealing with a fodder problem. And there are credit facilities available specifically for that problem. And Ulster Bank, for example, had set aside 25 million euros specifically for a weather fodder fund. And it's not being drawn down. So within Bank of Ireland, when I spoke to them about 10 days ago, only about 65% of the overdraft facilities that are available are being drawn down by lots of farmers. There was a 15% increase in the requests for increased overdraft facilities amongst farmers. In the rest of the economy, that figure is 37% in Bank of Ireland. So those figures suggest two things. One, that farmers, for whatever reason, don't feel comfortable going to banks. And that's a problem in itself.
Because they can't afford to go to banks, that's why.
Yeah, well,
trouble as it is.
The Minister without interruption.
Yeah. Because it's tempting. All about banks, banks, banks. He would fodder for
Please, the Minister without interruption.
Well, you have to buy fodder, Senator.
I know. We have.
And all of the conversations we've had is that this is primarily not about a credit crisis, it's about a fodder crisis. And if you spoke to a few more farmers, you'd probably understand that. In relation,
and living on a farm.
Yeah, well, maybe you should speak to some of your neighbours. We're trying to solve the nub of the problem here, which is getting fodder into Ireland, regardless of money on farms, whether it's there or whether it isn't. If there isn't fodder available to buy, you can't buy it. And that is the nub of the immediate crisis that we need to solve. And if farmers can't afford to buy that, well, then we will intervene and buy it for them. And we've made that very clear, and we are doing it on a daily basis, on a confidential basis with farmers. So credit should not prevent animals being fed. And I want to be clear on that. And I want to encourage farmers to talk to us if credit is a big problem in terms of getting them through a very difficult period. In terms of animal deaths, because this is something that people have raised, and I just want to give you some figures. In the first 3 months of this year, when actually there wasn't a fodder access crisis, so let's just be clear, there was a fodder quality issue throughout the winter because some farmers had poor fodder. But animals weren't starving. That wasn't the reason why a lot of animals lost their lives in the first 3 months of this year, which, by the way, was a similar mortality rate to 2009. So there was about 106,000 deaths on farms for the first 3 months of the year. Back in 2009, it was about 100,000. So yes, this year is a bad year in relation to mortality on farms, but it's not a massive outlier either. One of the reasons why we've had significant increased mortality this year is that we had a very unusual winter from a weather point of view, and we had poor quality fodder through the winter, even though there was volume there. And so nutrition wasn't as good as it should have been in herds. and we had unusual weather patterns which made it easier for disease to spread across herds, and that has resulted in increased mortality. We also had an increase in calving of about 3.5% this year, and a lot of mortality happens during calving, which also explains some of the increased figures. Now, if you want a more up-to-date figure, by the end of May, by the start of May, a few days ago, the figure the figure for this year is 143,000 deaths on Irish farms.
A lot of cattle.
Versus last year of 117,000. So I mean, there has been a significant increase on last year, although again, if you look back to 2009 or some other sort of crisis weather years, and there have been those, you will also see a higher figure. So yes, this is a particularly bad year, but there have been other years that are in a similar category. And we have to deal with that, and we need to ensure that next year we don't get a repeat of it. And that means working with farms in farmyards. It isn't about giving 10 or 12 million euros out to farmers. It's about focusing money where it's needed. If we need to put 10 million euros in place for a scheme that can make sure animals are fed, well, then we need to do it, and we have to take it from other schemes, if that's the priority that we have to put in place. But I want to be able to stand over every cent that I spend to ensure that we get full value for money in solving the problem at hand at the moment, which is about getting fodder into Ireland, which is why we've focused on the transport scheme as we have. The other thing I would say is that there's been some commentary that there's been a very tardy political response. Nobody was calling for a transport subsidy until I introduced it. Nobody. Nobody in the opposition, nobody in farm organisations, nobody. We introduced that. I was there for the second or third load of straw that came in to Mitchelstown through Dairygold. So we have been to the forefront in our department in terms of trying to respond to this as regards spending extra money where it's needed to encourage the importation of a significant increase in fodder. So yes, people were talking about difficulties in terms of weather patterns and agriculture, but nobody was coming up with any solutions until we started introducing them. So let's just be clear on that. We haven't been following anybody here. We've been trying to pull people together and find sensible, cost-effective solutions that can get feed into farmyards quite effectively. Yeah, I'll finish up now. I just want to make sure that I've answered all the questions. That's all. I mean, on the credit and banking thing, I don't want to give the impression that I have full faith in all banks to give credit. All I'm saying is the conversations I've had suggest that credit should be available for farmers who are struggling to find enough money to buy fodder. There is a confidence in the banking system that farming can actually repay these loans, and if there are, if there's anecdotal evidence or examples of farmers not getting a fair deal in terms of credit, I really do want to hear about it, and please use that facility, and we will follow up on that on a case-by-case basis, and we are following up, actually, on a case-by-case basis. So just finally on the fertiliser, on the cost of fertiliser, I mean, I can't reduce the cost of fertiliser. The vast majority of this is imported. It's like asking me to reduce the cost of gas, But what we can do is we can ensure that where farmers buy fertiliser, they are getting credit interest-free to actually buy that, to encourage them to buy it. And all of the co-ops have agreed to provide interest-free credit to their farmers for the month of May to encourage them to invest in fertiliser, because that is where we need to invest to ensure that we don't have a problem. But look, I'll happily come back into the Shannon later on in the summer or in September if you want, and we can reassess where we are in terms of actually the medium-term planning for next winter. And the auditing that we need to do on a farm basis to establish how much fodder is going to be there for next winter and what's going to be needed, because this is an ongoing issue. It's not simply just a question of filling the gap. There is an ongoing consequence here in terms of indebtedness for farmers and in terms of ensuring that animals are fed next winter. And so we need to have an ongoing discussion on it, and I'd happily facilitate that if I can.
Thank you, Minister. That concludes the statements on fodder shortage. Can I ask the acting leader when is it proposed to sit again?
Next Tuesday at 2:30.
Read the House stands adjourned until 2:30 on Tuesday next. Matters on the adjournment? I'd like to welcome Minister Cannon to the House. We have two motions of similar nature, and I indicated at the other business that the senators may share time. So, Senator Higgins.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach. Minister, many thanks for coming into the House to deal with this issue and to take this matter in the adjournment in relation to Yates Tower, Tourballylee in Galway. Minister, as you know, this is a building of special importance from an historical, a recreational and cultural perspective to the people of Kiltartan and Gort in County Galway. And indeed, in 1965, for the centenary of Yates' birth, Ballylee was fully restored by the Kiltartan Society, replete with a collection of first editions and items of furniture. And the adjoining cottage was a tea room and a shop from that period on. However, following the flooding of the Clune River in 2009, the tour was extensively damaged and it was no longer open to the public thereafter. However, I am aware that significant works have been undertaken by Fáilte Ireland to protect the structure in recent times, and I had made several representations to them in this regard since I was nominated to the Shannon by the Taoiseach. But I believe the famed tower which Yates purchased in 1917 and was used as a summer home by the poet and his family up until it was abandoned in 1929 is critical to any tourism revival in East Galway. And on that basis, I have been in correspondence and have had meetings with Fáilte Ireland on a number of occasions over the past 2 years, as I have stated, both in my own capacity and with the local tourism group called the Lady Gregory Yates Heritage Group, of which I was a member and who have done a huge amount of work in promoting this area and its tourism potential. I was also in contact with the Minister. I worked to summon interest as well in the structure by writing to interested parties in the Galway area in the past as a means of maximising the area's connection to WB Yates. And Tourballylee, it is fair to say, is steeped in connections with Yates and should be just as an important tourism landmark as is Grave and Drumcliff in County Sligo, where tens of thousands of people visit every year. And it's quite clear that South Galway badly needs a tourism boost, and I feel that the opening up of this tower, which I am on record for requesting in the past, is critical to the revival of the tourism sector in East Galway. And at this juncture, I suppose as well, I want to put it on record that I would like to thank Fáilte Ireland, who is in charge of Tourballylee, for their enthusiastic and positive responses to my meetings with them on the matter. And I look forward to hearing your response to my request to have the tower reopened to the public as a tourism attraction with all ancillary services. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's interesting that both of us have placed this motion at a similar time. Just to give you the background why I put this motion on the record, I was contacted by Ronnie O'Gorman, who is chairman of the Friends of Cool. Minister Deenhan was in Galway a number of months ago regarding the film school there, the Palace. And in the context of that, Ronnie O'Gorman met with myself and Minister Deenhan and really impressed upon us how important it is to reopen Tourballylee. And I would say this, there's a local group with multiple stakeholders whose names I'll give you in a minute, and it's their intention to reopen Tourballylee, which, as we know, is WB Yates's holiday home. I also want to put on record, I want to thank Minister Varadkar for his interest and guidance on this project so far, because I've been working with him, because the interesting thing is there's another model. There's another example of this where this has happened, where a local group have taken over a similar project in Dublin. It's the Joyce Tower in Sandy Cove. It was formerly owned by Dublin Tourism, and it will be handed over to Dunleary County Council this autumn. So it's that model that we're working on to replicate. And, you know, I obviously want to also put on record that we're seeking Minister Varadkar's continued support and cross-departmental support from Minister Deenan until Tour Ballylee is reopened with a solid programme. So really the aim of this group is that this would be a cultural centre with offering educational programmes. Because just to say to you, as Senator Higgins has said, following the flooding in 2009, everything came a cropper there. But wide-ranging discussions with local people from the Garta area, academics, members of the local authorities and local tourist interests have already taken place. There's a real keen enthusiasm that the Yates Tower is once again open to the public, to students of all ages and visiting scholars. We have UL and INUIG working very closely with this group at the moment. By bringing Tour Ballylee back on stream, we are pulling back the curtain on one of the most significant cultural landscapes in Europe. We do know that Yeats was a great friend of Lady Gregory, and our home was down the road in Cool Park. But the spirit of volunteerism in this regard is very alive and well to get this project back on stream. Minister Varadkar, as I said, has mentioned that we should use the model around the Joyce Tower, and I think there's a real willingness on that front. So immediately here are the requests, Minister, that we try and get Tour Ballylee open for 6 weeks of this summer. Then next year, that tour would be open from early spring to late autumn. There is room for a modest tea, lunch, cafe, etc. Just to tell you about the people then that have a real active interest in it. There's Professor Meg Harper from UL. She'd like to see tour available for visits by International Yates Society. Like, there's massive tourism potential here that students of Irish studies at both UL and INUIG would have access, and because it is such a perfect complement to Cool Park, it will become a major focus for foreign students at both Galway and Limerick universities. The educational programming that would surround this is obvious. Creative writing workshops as well. More than 5,000 children and adults attended events in the past, you know, to show interest in this area. So I just want to finish on this, Chairman, if you would. Already the following people from the South Galway area are actively involved. Michael O'Grady, who you may know, Colin Farrell, another local businessman, John Quinn, broadcaster and writer, Sister Mary de Lourdes Fahy, historian, and other academics.
The record of the House.
So just to finalise that, so where we're going now is we're in the process of putting out a letter, and we'll be inviting all local politicians, obviously including Senator Higgins, on the 10th of June to the Lady Gregory Hotel. And really, it's a multiple stakeholder process. Everybody must be involved. There's no doubt about that. I want to thank Senator Higgins for also, coincidentally, putting the motion on the record today. But, you know, let's move together on this together for the future of Tour Ballylee. Our only interest, and my only interest, I suppose, based on tourism generally. Thank you very much.
Antara. I'm pleased to attend the Shannon today on behalf of my colleague Leah Varadkar TD, the Minister for Transport, Tourism and Sport, who incidentally is abroad on official business. I want to explain the position in regard to